know this. Dennis Hastert did himself in. On Thursday, the Justice Department announced that it was indicting the former Speaker of the House on 2 counts, one for making illegal bank withdrawals, the other for lying to the FBI. The story goes as follows. Between 2010 and 2012, Hastert made 15 different withdrawals of $50,000 each from a handful of different banks. Those banks sensed that something was up, and so they tipped off the FBI. The FBI then asked Hastert what he was doing, and he said he was just using the money for himself, that he wasn't all that sure about the economy, maybe he was stashing under his mattress or something. In reality, and this is just according to the government, he was using that money to pay off a person from his past, a person who knew about some prior misconduct, reportedly sexual misconduct. After talking to the FBI, Hastert then started taking to make smaller withdrawals, under $10,000, apparently to try to fly under the radar of the government, which makes banks report withdrawals over $10,000. At that point, the Fed sensed something was up, so they went ahead and drew up an indictment. So if the government's story is true, then Dennis Hastert is probably guilty of something, if not a lot of things. The irony, though, is that he probably wouldn't have been caught if it weren't for the Patriot Act, a law that he helped push through as Speaker of the House. As the Huffington Post reported yesterday, law enforcement officials relied on the Patriot Act's expansion of bank reporting requirements to snare Hastert. As the IRS notes, the USA Patriot Act of 2001 increased the scope of cash reporting laws to help trace funds used for terrorism. Whatever you think about Dennis Hastert, and I was certainly never a fan, this raises some interesting questions. I mean, is it really any of the government's business how much money someone takes out of the bank? And even if it is, are a couple of strange bank withdrawals enough to warrant an indictment? Let's rumble. Joining me for tonight's Big Picture Rumble is Gianno Caldwell, federal lobbyist with Caldwell Strategic Consulting, T.J. Helmstetter, Director of Media Relations with the Progressive Change Campaign Committee, and Lori Sanders, Outreach Director with the R Street Institute. It's great to have you all back with us.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks,
Tom. In the last couple hours, we have learned it's from 2 different anonymous sources, but they're both government sources within the investigation, that it appears that the whole Hastert thing actually goes back to when he was a high school wrestling coach, and he was doing something with one of the kids, apparently one of the boys, maybe a second as well, and so, you know, which kind of puts a whole different thing on this. That said, though, we originally passed these laws that the banks had to turn us in to stop drug traffickers. Then we jacked it up with Denny Hastert's Patriot Act to stop terrorists. And here we are busting a guy who's paying off a blackmailer. I mean, you know, that's a whole separate thing, right? And so it's my initial response, and now, you know, it's kind of recalibrating, but I'm just curious all your thoughts on this, and we can talk about it, is that we've just gone nuts in this country. It's like the drug dealer stuff. Those laws that we put in place have resulted in an explosion in our prison population. They haven't done anything about our drug situation. The terrorism laws, we haven't caught any terrorists, or we have, but not through these laws. Yeah. It's all been normal law enforcement. And in the meantime, we have all lost the right to even pull $10,000 out of the bank, if any of us have any of it left, given the economy we've got, without having to answer to the FBI. And by the way, if you give him the wrong answer, that's what he's being charged with.
Right, yeah. You know,
saying that he was just sticking it under his mattress.
You know, Tom, I agree with you, first and foremost, that this law is pretty ridiculous, that they should be monitoring the money that you're pulling out of your account. I think that's pretty ridiculous. On the Denny Hastert part, that's someone that I know. I'm from Illinois, as you know. I've worked with many of his members of his former staff. And it's a really sad day in Illinois. It's a really sad week. He is the highest level elected official, former elected official, to be indicted. As you know, we have governors that go to jail, members of Congress, and lower level elected officials. But this is truly upsetting to many. He, in a lot of people's opinion, did a lot of good work in Illinois and as Speaker of the House. And it's just troubling.
Yeah,
that's all I can say about that.
Like a fairly reasonable speaker, although everybody seems to forget just before he resigned was the Foley thing, where, you know, Foley was sexting a teenage boy, and Hastert didn't do anything about that for a long time.
And Tom DeLay was basically running the House anyway. But I mean, look, like you said, there's many facets to this story. First and foremost, if the allegations are true that this involved sexual misconduct with a male student, I mean, that's deplorable. With any student, it's deplorable. Right. I find it particularly hypocritical considering Hastert's record on issues of the family and marriage and being against civil rights for LGBT people. Hastert's just the latest example of a Republican hypocrite. But
as far as though, being a hypocrite isn't a crime.
As far as it is when you're abusing children.
It is if you're a hypocrite about criminal activity. Okay.
When it comes to the Patriot Act, I mean, look, I think it's time for this thing to expire.
Yeah, Laurie.
And that's a good point that you just draw. It's an allegation, so we have to see what the investigation shows, and then we can make determinations from there. But good point.
Says the guy from Illinois. But you're right, Laurie.
Right. I mean, we're all certainly glad that, if there actually was misconduct, now we can talk about it and have an investigation. But the fact that it comes through the Patriot Act is completely ridiculous. I mean, we've done tons of work at our street. I know my colleague Nathan Lemer's been on here before, and he's done amazing work trying to push for these provisions that are about to expire to let them sunset, or to push for. We've actually been advocating heavily for the USA Freedom Act, which is the act that the House passed that would wind back sections of the Patriot Act. It doesn't go as far as anyone would like, but it's a step that we thought everyone could agree on in the right direction. Unfortunately, we all know that the Senate has sort of fallen apart and hasn't been able to move forward any reasonable reforms. But I think this is just one example of how that bill is not fulfilling its original purpose. And we need to examine better ways to keep our country safe from terrorists without butting into everyone's personal business, while this may need to be public.
And how often these laws that we pass, it's almost like we're hysterical to pass laws. I mean, whatever happened to the land of the free and the home of the brave? If Denny Hastert is guilty of sexual misconduct, for example, we had this, the McMartin preschool hysteria back about 2 decades ago, whatever it was, and that led to this explosion of automatic reporting, and you got to be on the list and all these kind of things. And now we've got 16 and 15-year-old kids who are having sex, and their lives are destroyed because for the rest of their life they're on a and we're looking at these laws going, wow, maybe we went too far,
Right, or not even just having sex, but that you peed in a public park as a teenager or something like that. I mean, teenagers do stupid things. Yeah. Do we really want them to be on a registry for the rest of their lives? Probably not. I mean, everybody's guilty of thinking about whether or not they should streak across the football field at the homecoming game. Yeah. They're teenagers.
I think, Nixon ran on this whole law and order thing. The silent majority, they're sick and tired of it. These damn hippies, look at these people out here smoking pot and having sex and having too much fun and all this stuff. And it began this process. Democrats piled in. Everybody was afraid to be soft on crime. I think we've gone nuts.
Okay, but let's be clear. With respect, this is not the McMartin preschool trials, which were a fraud. This isn't kids streaking. This is a respected, beloved figure in a community.
I'm no longer talking about
Denny
Hastert. I'm talking
abusing
about
a student. Well, I just wanted to make that clear.
Yeah. No, I think we all acknowledge that, and that's a crime, and if let those chips fall where they may. But how do we conduct ourselves, in the legislative process? I guess that's just, it's just, anyway. FIFA, after a closer than expected election that almost went, or FIFA, I guess it is, into a runoff round. That's how little I know about soccer. FIFA President Sepp Blatter was reelected today as chief of World Soccer's governing round. His reelection comes just days after the Justice Department indicted 14 individuals, including 9 current and former FIFA officials, on charges related to wire fraud, corruption, and conspiracy. I don't want to discount the Department of Justice, but it seems to me like the big difference between FIFA and the banksters, who have also committed huge crimes. I mean, far more. This is $150 million worth of bribes. The banksters, billions of dollars of actual crimes to which they have already confessed, right? Actually confessed. That the difference is that the FIFA guys were asking politicians for money, and the banksters give it to the politicians, give money to politicians. Am I being too cynical?
I think the difference here is that just how easy the soccer officials made it for the DOJ. I mean, this is from an old spy comedy. We're talking about guys walking around with suitcases full of cash. That's how laughable all of this is. I mean, it's not funny when it turns out that they're being bribed by countries that basically have forms of legalized slavery, Qatar, in order to host the World Cup. I mean, that is deplorable. I think the World Cup should be moved. But yeah, obviously the DOJ should work on tougher cases involving the banksters.
Yeah, shouldn't we do what Reagan did in 83, 86, whatever the year was? He deregulated the S&Ls, and then 3 years later they crashed, And you know, they investigated over 1,000 people. They prosecuted over 800. Over 300, as I recall, went to jail. The Keating Five, you know, it almost took down John McCain's career because of Charles Keating. Why aren't we going after banksters? Why are we sending police to Switzerland?
Because, I mean, cronyism is a huge issue, whether you're a Democrat or Republican. I know this is somewhere that you and I agree. I mean, Hillary Clinton is just as guilty as many people in the Republican Party, that they're just too comfortable with Wall Street. They're just too comfortable with big financial institutions. And I mean, I'm not on the same page with you about maybe necessarily always thinking the banks are big and evil. But when there's actual problems, there are problems, and it is sort of the cronyism in our government that keeps these things from being examined all the time.
You know, one point that you mentioned there, and I'm surprised to see you heaping praise on President Reagan, former President Reagan, but I think
he did the right thing.
He did the right thing, indeed he did. But I think one thing that we're discounting is you don't see as many executives in the major banks going to jail, but you do see some of the more smaller regional banks that the federal government is cracking down on it.
So,
but TJ, 10 seconds.
Okay. I'm not going to play false equivalency. The Democratic Party is the party that, you know, put forward Glass-Steagall and Dodd-Frank, not the Republican Party. Democrats and Republicans are not equal here.
Yeah, and okay. Final point. More of tonight's Big Picture Rumble after the break.